I need to tell you about the dinner where my friends set me up with a woman who had just lost her job, her apartment, and her relationship in the span of 6 weeks, and decided, for reasons I still do not fully understand, that a blind date was the appropriate next step in her recovery. I need to tell you about what happened when she told me all of that, not what I said, what I did, and why what I did made 4 people at that table go completely quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. But before I get there, if you've ever been in a room where someone said a true thing and the whole room changed temperature, leave a like. Because that is the closest I can get to describing what happened at that dinner table in Philadelphia, and I want you to feel the shape of it before I explain the rest. My friends Marcus and Diane had been trying to set me up for the better part of a year. They were the kind of couple who had found each other early and spent the subsequent decade operating under the conviction that everyone they loved deserved the same outcome, which I respected in theory and found mildly exhausting in practice. They had introduced me to 3 women in 14 months. The first had been perfectly pleasant and entirely wrong. The second had been the same. The third had not shown up, which I did not take personally, but which had made the dinner itself somewhat awkward. When Marcus called in early November and said he wanted to try one more time, I said yes because I trusted him and because I was tired of the sound my apartment made on Sunday evenings. He said her name was Lena. He said she was a friend of Diane's from graduate school. He said she was smart and honest and had been through a difficult few months, but was in a good place now. I heard difficult few months and in a good place now, and noted that these 2 things could be true simultaneously, but were also the kind of combination that warranted paying attention. I said I'd be there. The restaurant was in Rittenhouse Square, small, Italian, the kind of place with cloth napkins and no music, loud enough to require leaning in. Marcus and Diane were already at the table when I arrived. Lena was not. She came in 4 minutes later. She was tall, dark-haired, wearing a navy coat she had not yet taken off, and had the specific expression of a person who had agreed to something earlier in the week when it seemed manageable and was now standing at the edge of it, reconsidering. She saw the table, saw me, and made the decision to continue. That mattered to me from the first moment. She had clearly not wanted to be there, and she came in anyway. She sat across from me. We said our names. Diane immediately began doing the thing she did at these events, where she spoke quickly and warmly to fill the space that strangers needed to breathe in, and Marcus watched me the way he always watched me when he thought he had done something right. The first 20 minutes were the manageable kind of awkward. We talked about the neighborhood, about the restaurant's pasta, which Marcus had been recommending to everyone he knew for 2 months, about a documentary Lena mentioned she had just finished watching. She was precise when she spoke, not stiff, precise. She chose words the way a person chooses them when they care about accuracy. I noticed it and filed it as the kind of thing I noticed. Then Diane, with the gentle persistence of someone who had been planning this evening for 3 weeks, asked Lena how things were going since the move. The table went slightly alert, not dramatically, just the small shift that happens when everyone at a table knows a subject has arrived, that one person at the table did not know was coming. Lena looked at her water glass. Then she looked at me directly, with the expression of someone deciding in real time whether to say the managed version or the honest one. She said the honest one. In the last 6 weeks, she said, she had been laid off from the architecture firm where she had worked for 4 years. Her apartment, which had been tied to a co-signing arrangement she had with her former partner, a man named Joel, had become complicated when Joel ended the relationship, which he had done 2 weeks after the layoff. She was staying with Diane and Marcus temporarily, which she said without embarrassment, and was looking for work and an apartment, and, she added with a small and very dry precision, probably a different approach to co-signing anything. The table was quiet for a moment. Marcus and Diane both looked at me with the particular expression of people waiting to see how a person handles information they were not prepared for. Here is what I did not do. I did not say "I'm so sorry" in the automatic way that closes a subject instead of opening it. I did not say something supportive and calibrated and slightly too cheerful. I did not look at Marcus with a face that communicated this is a lot, or reach for my wine to buy time. Here is what I did. I looked at her and said, "How are you actually doing with all of that?" Not the social version of the question, the real one. With the word actually in it, which is the word that separates a genuine inquiry from a pleasantry. The table went quiet, not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. The kind that happens when something true has been introduced into a room and everyone waits to see what it does next. Lena looked at me for a moment. I held her gaze because looking away would have cheapened the question. Then she said, "Some days better than others. Last Tuesday was bad. Today is actually fine." I nodded. What was bad about Tuesday? She looked slightly surprised, not offended. Surprised, the way a person looks when they expected to be managed and got asked instead. "I had a second interview that I thought went well and then didn't hear back," she said. And I drove past the old apartment and the lights in the kitchen were on, and I thought about how I had picked those curtains, and I just sat in my car for a while. I said, "That sounds like a Tuesday that earned its reputation." She laughed. It was small and unexpected and real. Marcus reached for his bread. Diane exhaled quietly, which I understood as relief. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. When someone tells you they are going through something hard, what is your first instinct? To comfort, to solve, to minimize, or to ask what it was actually like? Leave a comment, because I think the answer says something about how we learn to be around people in pain, and it mattered more that night than any of us predicted. We ordered. The dinner moved into the easier rhythm that happens when two strangers have cleared the first honest thing between them. Lena talked about architecture with the specific animation of a person who had chosen their work carefully and missed it the way you miss something you had earned. I asked about the firm. She talked about what she had been good at there and what she had not, which I respected because most people, when discussing a place that let them go, chose one story or the other. I told her about my work, urban planning and infrastructure, which overlapped enough with architecture that we spent 20 minutes in a conversation that Marcus and Diane mostly watched with the expressions of people watching something they had hoped for, but had not been certain of. Near the end of the main course, Lena looked at me and said, with the direct precision that was already becoming recognizable, "You asked me a question earlier that most people don't ask." I said, "Which one?" "How I was actually doing." I waited. She picked up her fork. "Most people," she said, "when they hear the 6-week version, say some variation of that's a lot, and then they change the subject. Or they say it'll get better, which is probably true, but isn't what I need to hear on a Tuesday." She paused. "You asked what it was like. There's a difference," I said. She nodded. "There is." I looked at my plate for a second. "My mother," I said, "used to say that asking how someone is doing is a greeting. Asking what it's been like is a conversation. She was a hospice nurse for 30 years. Lena was quiet for a moment. "That's where you learned it," she said. "From watching her, yes." She set her fork down. "Was she good at it?" "She was the best I've ever seen," I said. "She could walk into a room where everything was falling apart and ask one question, and suddenly the room knew it was being witnessed." She paused. "Not fixed. Witnessed. There's a difference." Lena looked at me with the expression she had worn when she arrived. The one I now understood was not reluctance, but a form of readiness. The look of a person who had been preparing to manage a situation and was recalibrating because the situation had turned out to be something else. "That's what you did tonight," she said. "At the beginning. With the how are you, actually. I didn't plan it. I know." She looked at her glass. "That's why it worked." Marcus cleared his throat, not obtrusively, the way a person does when they want the moment to be acknowledged without being interrupted. Diane looked at the ceiling briefly in the specific way of a woman who had known she was right about something and was choosing not to say so out loud. Dessert was tiramisu. The conversation moved into lighter things, the way conversations do when the heavy part has been handled well, and there is room left over for the easier versions of people. Lena had opinions about bridges, which she delivered with complete seriousness, and which I found completely reasonable. I had opinions about city zoning that she pushed back on twice and was right about once. When the check came, Marcus reached for it with the energy of a man settling a debt he felt good about. Lena and I argued briefly over contributing, and she looked at me during the argument with an expression that suggested she was filing something away. Outside, the November air in Rittenhouse Square was cold and clear, the kind of night where the city looked like someone had meant it. Marcus and Diane said their goodbyes with the minimal fuss of people who understood when to leave. Then it was just Lena and me on the sidewalk, and the square, and the particular quiet of a Friday night that had not yet decided what it was going to become. She looked at the square. I looked at her. She said, "I'm glad I came. Even though you didn't want to?" She smiled, small and real. "Even though," I said. "For the record, Marcus told me you'd been through a difficult few months and were in a good place now." She looked at me sideways. And I thought that combination was worth paying attention to. She was quiet for a moment. The cold moved through the square, and she pulled her coat slightly tighter, not because she was leaving yet. "I'm not in a good place yet," she said. "I'm in a getting there place. That's an honest answer." She looked at me. "You seem to like honest answers. They're more useful than the other kind." She nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when an answer lands somewhere it was needed. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah. Earlier, when I told you the 6-week version." She paused. "You didn't flinch. No, most people flinch, even good ones. There's a second where you see them recalibrate, decide whether the whole situation is too much." I looked at the square. My mother used to say that people who've been through hard things carry them differently, depending on whether anyone ever asked what it was like. She paused. The ones who were asked carry it like a thing they survived. The ones who weren't asked carry it like something they should have hidden. Lena looked at me for a long moment. The square was quiet around us. A couple walked past with a dog. Someone further away laughed at something. "I've been carrying mine like the second kind," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I asked." She looked at the ground, then at me. Then she did something I did not expect. She laughed, not nervously, not sadly, the genuine kind. The kind that arrives when something that has been heavy gets lighter, faster than expected. "You are a strange kind of person," she said. "I'll take that." She started walking slowly, not toward anything specific, just the kind of walking you do when you're not ready to stop the evening, but are not sure yet what the evening is. I walked beside her. She said, "Joel never asked what things were like, even before the end. He would ask how things were going, and I would say fine, and he would say good, and that would be it." I listened. She said, "I got very good at saying fine." "I know the shape of that," I said. She glanced at me. "Do you?" I was with someone for 2 years who asked about everything except what mattered. The facts were always fine with her. The architecture of the thing she was not interested in. He paused. It took me a while to understand that not being asked was its own kind of loneliness. Lena stopped walking. We were at the far edge of the square now, under a tree that had lost most of its leaves. She looked at me with the direct, precise expression I had come to expect from her by now. She said, "I have one more interview on Monday. I have 3 apartments to look at next week. And I have exactly no idea what comes next." "That sounds like the beginning of something," I said. She tilted her head. "Or the end." "Those look similar from the inside," I said. "My mother said that too." She was quiet. Then, "She sounds like someone worth quoting." "She was the best person I knew," I said simply. Lena looked at me for a moment with the look I was beginning to understand was her version of paying attention, full and unhurried and missing nothing. She said, "I would like to hear more about her sometime." "I would like to tell you," I said. That was it. No grand gesture, no declaration, just 2 people on the edge of a square in Philadelphia in November, one of them carrying something heavy the careful way, and one of them willing to ask what it was like, and both of them standing there a little longer than the evening strictly required. 3 weeks later, Lena found the apartment. She called me before she called Diane, which is the detail I return to when I want to understand what that dinner meant. She said, "I'm signing the lease tomorrow." I said, "How are you actually feeling about it?" She laughed, and it was the same laugh from the restaurant, the real one, the kind that arrives when something gets lighter. She said, "Better than last Tuesday." "That's a good Tuesday," I said. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It really is. If this story stayed with you, leave a like. And if you know what it feels like to be asked the real question instead of the easy one, subscribe. The next story is already waiting. If you made it all the way to the end, comment. He asked what it was actually like.